Hello and welcome back to the Big Esports Podcast. This is episode number 52 with Mervyn Lau from TOKIGAMES. He's the founder, CEO, legal counsel, and for anyone who's a startup founder knows, there's many more hats to wear. We talk about his history in business and esports and gaming as a whole, working for the Singaporean government, working as a lawyer, coming into what he's doing today. We talk about a startup founder like him having no fallback options. It's do or die for him in business. We talk about gamification and remove some of the woo-woo around that, talking about proving that it is something positive and it's not just a buzzword. And then we deep dive a lot into gaining funding, understanding your exit, picking the right co-founders, looking after your staff, and checking your ego, Jocko Willink style. So for anyone who listens to Jocko podcast, I think you might enjoy this one too. For any of the show notes for anything we talked about today, you can head to bigesports.gg/52. That's the numbers 52. For any of the links, you can see Mervyn's lovely face on there and any of the topics that we have talked about today. Enjoy this episode. I know that I did. Thanks so much for being a listener of this podcast. We've created it really to help increase information sharing and understanding of the esports market. If you'd like to help us out, feel free to leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you do, and make sure to share this with your friends. Hopefully we've been able to provide some fantastic information to you and a bit of a learning experience over this period of time, whether you're looking to skill up, enter the industry, or you're just looking to monitor to see how things are going. If you'd like to put yourself forward as a guest, suggest any others, or ask any questions, feel free to connect with us at bigesports.gg or on any of the social media platforms at bigesports_gg. Mervyn, welcome to the podcast, mate. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Hi, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. I think you are the second person we've had on the podcast from Asia, so there you go.
Interesting. Glad to be on.
Yeah, no worries, mate. And I guess, what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different because it's not, I guess in the past we've had at least the past 5 or so podcasts, it's been hyper esports focused, yep. But we've got something that's a little bit more gaming and a bit soft into esports. So I'd love for you to kick off the podcast as we always do and let us know a little bit about your interesting history in business and how that brings you to where you are today.
Sure. So currently I'm the CEO, founder, and legal counsel of TOKIGAMES. We are a startup based in Singapore. I actually founded this company in 2017. Prior to that, actually, I was working as a lawyer. So I was a lawyer for 4 years in the field of intellectual property. Before that, I was actually working for our government in Singapore. I've come a long way as a business, and as since the day that we were founded, Yeah.
So how did the ideation and creation process go for you at TOKIGAMES? And can you give me, or the listeners at least, a little bit of an elevator pitch as to what you do?
Sure. So really, when we first started out, I pitched this idea to a couple of people who are now my co-founders. 4 of them, actually, to be specific. And, I came up with an idea that, as an avid esports fan myself, I really wanted something more to do during an esports match, right? And so I thought, it'd be quite cool and quite fun, as a side project to come up with a game that I could play. And that's how it really started as a product, and really focus on the product. Now it's kind of evolved into a situation where we're doing more B2B2C, kind of business model, where we speak to companies, clients, stakeholders within the esports ecosystem with our solution. Really what we've come up with is a gamification software as a service. And the various people that could use this are brand owners, your venues, your event organizers, tournament organizers as well, your professional teams, even your creative and marketing agencies. So all these guys are basically have different needs for our software. And that's how we're really catering to the market right now.
And how do you provide benefit to the people you're looking to plug in then? In what's your sales pitch?
Sure. So the bottom line is really, our software enables you to better activate and engage your audiences. This could be anything from, all your marketing objectives, from acquisition to retention, to monetization. But really, it's meant to be a full service kind of software solution where we could customize various functions and components within the software to bring out and to really hone in on certain types of objectives that the stakeholder might have. So there's no really one fit to each stakeholder or to all the stakeholders. What we typically do is we enter into a pretty deep consultative process with each stakeholder, and then we will kind of hone in on exactly what they want to do, and then we'll customize it that way.
Do you have some stats about that? Like, I know that for myself, when I'm watching esports tournaments, especially in the breaks, like, one of my favorite esports tournaments of all time that I talked about on a LinkedIn live stream this morning is the International. But I remember my friends and I were watching it live at an esports bar here in Melbourne, and it took about 5 hours worth of time to get through a single best of three, I think it was, semi-final. And there's so much downtime where we're super bored. The analysts are talking, we're not so interested in that. There's waiting, there's delays, there's, the stream was waiting for the players to set up their mice and keyboards, et cetera, et cetera. Like, do you have any stats about, what exactly these people are looking for and how you're addressing that?
Sure. So in general, it's funny that you mentioned TI because there's one of the events that we did. In general, people who are introduced to our game or to our gamification software platform, within which a key feature is what we call a spectator game contest. And in this spectator game contest, just to give you and the listeners some context, it really is some form of contest where you get to enter as a spectator for free, obviously, and then you get to play a game during the actual match. So that's the first thing that distinguishes, this spectator game contest, in the sense that a lot of contests kind of typically run prior to the actual match. So you kind of do your selections or whatever, and then, you watch the match after that, and you finally get your results at the end. But we wanted to flip the tables a bit because, as I said earlier on, the key emphasis here is about active engagement, right, and active activation.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make it feel like we wanted to sustain a level of, entertainment and a level of immersion, I guess, throughout the entire match itself. Like you said yourself, there are certain downtimes, right? So during those downtimes, during the match is when we let our players kind of do things on the game. For example, switch out the positions or add to the positions, etc. And what we find is about 96% of people that gets introduced to our game actually do try it out at some point in time. On a general basis, though, we're looking at about a 50% rate. So if you're looking at 2,000 people watching a particular stream, and if they are adequately informed about a game being run at the same time, and it's our game, we'll find around 50% of people playing the game. So that's the amount of people and some numbers for you to digest regarding how many people actually interact with the game.
Yeah, because there's so much discussion in so many other podcasts about the detriment of being so attached to mobile phones and, people not concentrating at dinner and such. But you see this all the time. I see people pulling out their phone during meetings because they're disengaged. You see people when they're watching television or Netflix with friends or at home or in a public space, pulling out their phones, scrolling through Instagram in the ad breaks, etc. So is that what you're looking to capture? Are you looking to capture that wandering attention?
Exactly. Honestly, to me, if you're offline or even online and you're watching an esports match, right? You really are interested in it, but the reason why you even divert your attention away from it is because, truthfully, like you said, there's really sometimes where in the match there's not much to look at and there's not much to do. So you're hopping onto Instagram, Facebook, etc. But what we really want you to do is kind of concentrate on the events that are happening during the match. So our game doesn't even care who wins or loses the matchup. It's really about what's happening at that point in time or in the next 5 minutes, etc. So that's really our key target profile, I guess, of a player.
And who else is targeting things like this at the moment besides gamification? Is there anyone? The only other example I can really think of is Unicorn with their bingo app that they trialed during IEM Sydney 2018, trying to get people to maintain engaged. Is this an emerging trend that you're seeing?
Well, so we've done a fair bit of research on who are our competitors in the market. To be very honest with you, I don't think there's a direct competitor in the sense that our gamification technology is patented technology. So, for one, we know that it's novel. So there's nothing out there that really exists in the exact same identical way. However, there are similar, I guess, in the US, fantasy esports and fantasy sports is really big there. 60 million a year play fantasy sports in North America. The thing here is that I think in terms of pre-game contests, I think there's a bunch of them. For live game contests, I think what the common or the typical mode of gameplay right now is something what we call proposition gameplay, where they would pose a question to you every 5 minutes and you would answer that question, and that's that. So that doesn't really fit into our model as well. We really wanted a model where we think of players and teams as representing, think about it like a stock or a share, right? So we wanted you to buy shares of these players and teams and to kind of put it in your roster. And not only do you get to put them into your roster, you get to select the amount. So you could buy one Apple stock, but you could buy 10 as well, right? So we wanted to as well, let your conviction determine how many copies of a particular player that you want to put into your roster. And so that's really our game. And we think it's, I haven't come across anything like that. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, you did for sure. And look, to rephrase my next question, you obviously don't have to answer direct numbers, but I'd like to learn from you in regards to revenue streams. Where is your main pitch? Are you drawing revenue from the events to partner with you? Are you relying on revenue from the consumers, using your product from sponsors? Is it a mixture? I'd be interested to learn.
Sure. So, being a B2B2C business, the revenue stream right now is almost fully concentrated on, client agreements. So typically we do retainer agreements or a one-off, campaign agreement with a client. And that's so we're kind of, doing it on an enterprise commercial agreement kind of level. And so that's really where the main revenue is. Where our value add comes in and what we try to do to justify that amount that the client is paying to us is, again, each client has their own stakeholders as well, right? So, we want to give them the kind of matrix and the ROI numbers to show to their stakeholders. For example, if they are an event organizer and they need to show a sponsor or an advertiser, like, hey, look, in the past, I know you've bought ads and to put into our event space. And we really couldn't we could only estimate a certain amount of impressions that were given to that ad. Now you could actually do a much more deeper analysis into those, actual actionable matrix to say, not only do we know how many people did look at a particular ad, but we also know how many people, kind of interacted with it and gone further to, become a user or consumer for yours, etc. So these are the things that we are able to provide through our platform because, again, we measure everything on the platform and we tend to want to give all these numbers to the stakeholders because we know that at the end of the day, the conversation has shifted into sustainability, into monetization, etc.
Yeah, definitely. And adding to that too, the lack of data, right? We saw Gfinity in Australia shut up shop and part of the blame that they provided was the inability to get in-depth consumer data from Twitch. And we've seen that through many other brands as well, especially these brands from outside esports that esports people often call non-endemic for those listening, who are brands that aren't inherently involved in the esports space. They're saying, I don't know exactly who the fans are, where they live, what ages they are, how they're activating, what their earnings are as well, and all of these important things to learn. And I guess if you're providing another data capture point, that sounds like a strong proposition for you as TOKIGAMES as well.
Yeah, just to share with you, I think, we've been fairly active in the esports, community in Singapore at least, right? And or the greater Southeast Asian region. And, 2 years ago when we attended a summit in Singapore, I think then the question was really, people were trying to figure out still, what was esports? And if I was a non-endemic, how do I get into that scene to become an endemic after that, and stuff like that. And I think, over the past few years and this year when we spoke at the same summit, the conversation shifted to more of one of sustainability. People were talking about, hey, look, so, I know that a lot of money has been invested into the esports scene. We've run a couple of events, we've sponsored a couple of teams, etc. But, I'm having troubles answering to my board right now on exactly what is going to come out of this, right? And obviously, the people who are in the industry, we know that is a long-term play. Ultimately, what the esports audience represent is your next generation of consumers, right? So that's why everyone is getting to the space. But I guess for now, it can't be a situation where the ecosystem is being run by brands trying to come in and brands just throwing money into events and teams, etc., and hoping, that something comes out from it, right? They actually need some form of assurance. And at the end of the day, you're gonna run out of brands at some point in time who wants to sponsor tournaments. And the irony behind this is that the more people come into the space and the more tournaments pop up, here and there, the more saturated and the more time-starved the entire environment becomes. And then it becomes a situation where everyone's kind of competing against each other, in addition to competing for the consumer's attention, right? And so that's where we're at right now. I feel like we're heading to that. And that's where TOKIGAMES is really positioning ourselves within the space, in the middle of the ecosystem, saying to everyone, hey, look, we get that you guys have the traditional way of doing, esports sponsorships, esports marketing, etc. But, we could do, real numbers here for you guys, and we could actually show you tangible results in terms of exactly who you're engaging and how often are they engaging with you and how long are they engaging with you for, So, yeah.
For sure, yeah. And this is a discussion that we've had a few times here on the podcast and on my LinkedIn live streams and various other places. And to wrap up my thoughts on what you were saying is that so many people in esports right now are trading on the industry numbers, not on what they're actually delivering. So they're not providing what uplift they can give to these sponsors. They're not providing direct ROI. They're not providing numbers that they've actually achieved themselves or they have direct people have achieved. They're talking about, here's the global market. It's valued over $1 billion. Here's teams that are valued at $310 million, according to Forbes, like Cloud9, and Team Soul Limit opening a $30 million facility, and the Essendon Bombers in Australia, a football team, getting into esports. But they're ignoring the fact of what exactly are they doing. And I think it can be dangerous, especially with so many esports team decks that I see that come across and say, our uplift is going to be from sponsorship dollars. That's where our pie chart is, headed towards, and that's the global industry average. However, they don't have a single salesperson to actually close those sales. So how do they expect to, essentially, in quotation marks, pay back the investment money that they gather to grow their company if the thing that they're trading on, they're fully just not even paying much attention to?
Yeah, I think, that's the thing, right? I mean, sponsorship monies is nice. But, at the end of the day, if you really want to ensure some form of longevity, you've really got to investigate exactly on why someone's sponsoring you, right? I mean, clearly they're not doing it for fun. They have a bottom line to meet as well. And at the end of the day, they could have been doing it once or twice without knowing any better, just as kind of like an experiment. But it's not going to be sustainable in the long run, and that's what we're trying to do now. So, I mean, early on you brought up like Gfinity, right, in Australia, and I also heard about their closing shop, and I looked into it, and it's a pity whenever these things happen. I feel like it's quite unnecessary, maybe for a slew of reasons, right? It could be that they didn't really explore other methods of trying to show that ROI, and if they did, perhaps the story could have been much more different. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think people need to pay a bit more attention to exactly, how they can preserve their status within the ecosystem.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of companies get into esports right now because they want to say that they're in the ecosystem. They're taking a leap of faith because it's exciting. They can see the growth, but they haven't necessarily got those metrics and numbers pushed behind them. But that's going to start becoming a very serious thing, especially when this first series of contracts that have been signed through, say, the major food and beverage or automotive companies who've been around for almost a year now, they're going to have to start re-signing soon. So it'll suffice to see, are they going to re-sign and are they happy with their investment?
Yeah. I mean, on that point, I'll just to end off that point, I'll just say that, that's really also what, our platform is trying to do. We're trying to create this dedicated domain where a brand can say to directly and establish a direct line of communication with the end user and say, hey, look, I've created this domain for you. And I want this to be somewhere that you can come back on a daily basis, on a routine, and to, check out my content, to enjoy esports like the way you want it to, and to just do everything within this one-stop place. And the good thing here, I think, is that by having this direct line of communication, you're kind of emerging from the noise that's really out there. Because, I mean, sure, yeah, you could purchase an ad and you can put it on a team's shirt, and you could, have some presence on it in an offline or online event. But really, who's really watching that, right? I mean, when we tune into esports stream, we're not looking at the ads. I get that the ads are there, and I get that subconscious element to it that kind of, puts that the brand into our minds. But it really is still a passive and linear form of consumption. And what we really wanted it to do is, to turn the passive consumer into an active participant of your brand, or active ambassador for your brand.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you made some great points. And I wanted to change tack slightly. So some of the people that listen to this podcast are raising capital at the moment. Sure. They're either founders already, they're looking to create something, or they're looking to scale. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about being a founder, about capital, and a few different questions in there. So to start off, can you give a bit of an idea to those listening about what your day-to-day involves? You mentioned that you're the founder, CEO, and the legal counsel. So as with many startup founders, you're wearing multiple hats.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, there's way more hats than that. But yeah, so I mean, in general, on a day-to-day basis, I work very closely with the co-founders and the management of the company. So there's 5 of us in total. There's myself, CEO, and then I have my CFO, Benedict. I've got my COO, who's in charge of our operations as well as marketing. That's Matthews. I've got Warren, who's our Chief Products Officer, and finally, but not least, I've got our Chief Technical Officer, Thailand. So we generally, have a pretty early meeting every morning, kind of go through, the agenda for any new things that have come up over the night. And during the day, really, we're just, kind of managing our own departments and hustling along the way, really. And of course, myself, I've got to take, care of our IP assets, our contracts, our commercial agreements, etc. Because, myself, I think there are 2 lawyers in this office, but the other one is doing more of a marketing role. So we kind of split it between ourselves. So how do you go about the process of picking the right co-founders to be involved? It's something that I guess is even a little bit foreign to me, because I can't give first-hand experience because I'm a solo founder myself, but you're obviously sitting at the really high end with multiple founders. Yeah. So, like I told you, when I pitched it to the people at the beginning of the business, I think that the one characteristic or trait that I was really looking out for is, if there could be an amount of trust within that relationship. At the end of the day, I think, and I'm really proud of this, to be honest, when people look at our founding team and our management team in general at TOKIGAMES, they are looking at a really unified picture. And that's not something that we put up as a front. The truth is, we've taken a lot of pains to be aligned in our everyday, day-to-day, and even in the epic kind of story that we're trying to tell. And it's not something that's being forced, but rather, because I had the privilege or the liberty to, speak to these people at the very beginning, I had the first chance to, assess if they are even aligned to begin with, at the very beginning. And also, I think that the trust factor, another thing that comes in is whether they trust me as a leader of the team, right? Because I feel like a lot of times, when startups fail, sure, I mean, it could be financial, it could be a whole slew of other reasons, but really one of the things that we're looking at is, infighting amongst the management team, right? And when that happens, I feel like, you can take 2 steps forward, but you're really taking 3 steps back every single time. And not only that, you're pulling down morale in the entire company, etc. So as far as we are concerned, alignment is a huge part for us. Trust in our process is also another thing. We try not to micromanage so much. We try to go on a collaborative front with each and every single employee. So it's a fairly flat hierarchy right here, and it's only because we feel like we want everyone to fight for the company, right? Obviously, even your employees in the company, and to even get that fight from them, you need to let them, rise up and say something and to fight you on certain things, right? And so we don't want to suppress anyone, and we encourage people to kind of, stand up to state their opinions. And if they really think something is going in the wrong direction, we're always open to be convinced. And frankly, I like being convinced by a different viewpoint, because that means, there was something better that I didn't know about, and someone did educate me about that.
Yeah, and I guess it's like what you were saying. There's a famous ex-Navy SEAL called Jocko Willink who has a fantastic podcast I listened to. I kind of binged that at 1.5 times speed over a few months, and listened to all 130 of them. And he talks a lot in there about if you're not getting pushback from the people you're working with or from subordinates, you're doing something wrong, because it means they're too scared. And you want to hire people that are smarter than you and work with people that have different experience than you, and you want them to feel very open to pushback. And while sometimes it feels bad because you might have made a wrong decision and they're pushing back, that's why they're there. They're the expert, and it's your job as the founder, CEO, and head honcho to check your ego and to realize that actually it's your ego that's getting in the way here. Maybe it's your ego that can't stand being wrong, and you need to put that aside and actually listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, I think it's really mutual respect for each other. In the first place, if you didn't even respect your co-founders, or really honestly anyone in your company, to a certain degree, you shouldn't be even working with them to begin with. And so I think, that's the advice that I have for other potential as someone who's looking to start their own business with a team, right? Is first and foremost, look at whether have a fairly casual chat first with whoever you're looking to pitch your idea to. And when you're pitching your idea, I guess, don't just go up to someone and just, kind of give a brief verbal kind of thing. You really want to kind of put down a plan and state really clearly, what your goals are, what your objectives are, how do you think you're going to get there, the methodology and the philosophy of the company, and et cetera. Because if you do all these, it might seem like very small things at the beginning, but honestly, what you're doing is you're setting the ground for a point of alignment, a point where you can align with that particular person, right? And if that person can kind of come on board at that point in time with everything kind of laid out, the skeletal framework of how you intend to run the business and where you intended the business to hit to, then, generally speaking, that's a pretty good recipe for success, right? So, yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I definitely think it's about, I think there's two major things I'd like to take from that. Number one is my mention on ego, and number two is your mention on respect. If you have that fundamental respect, and if you're hiring the right people, that's where things change. And I've had that experience as an employee. I've worked in one company before where they just they underhired. They overhired heads, as in they hired too many people at a too low of a salary with too low of experience. Whereas I worked for another company where I believe they underhired, they should have had more staff, but they overpaid compared to the industry average, and also they hired over-experienced people who really seemed to care and understand about what they were doing.
Yeah.
And while I had similar workloads, I think, in both in the end, because in one of them I was picking up the slack for people who couldn't do their job, and the other one I was given the responsibility and the respect that as a completely remote worker in another country, one of my bosses was in Asia, another one was in Europe, and another one was in the US, nowhere near physically close to me. They gave me the full respect and saying, hey, we hired you to do this job. We're not going to look over your shoulder day to day. All we require is for you to keep us informed with what's going on. And I was able to work autonomously and achieve some great results.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. That's the similar model that we work with. I think the other thing I would say is that, for us, we also believe in being proactive with our, the guys under us, right? So at the end of the day, I'm kind of what I call a people believer. Sometimes, I'm the last one standing, kind of, I'm always trying to find some positive and someone's strengths, right? And I kind of believe that, look, I feel like everyone has a particular room to grow. And I feel like, it's really on us as leaders. If someone is not growing and someone is not performing in our company, I take it upon myself and the management team. and to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? We don't go to the employee as a first step, because honestly, I think that's where it starts with, right? I mean, could it be that we're not giving them enough opportunities, or we're not kind of giving them the right guidance to push hard in certain areas and not so much in the others that don't really matter that much, and stuff like that. So it's a question of really how much do you care for your employees, and how much do you want to see them grow. And a lot of times, during interviews with new guys, we always ask the question of, what is it that you really genuinely are interested to do, and where do you want to grow, and that's that to us, that answer really kind of either hits it on the spot for us, or it misses it completely, right? Because, if they are saying something that goes along the lines that is related to their role that they're coming in for, then that's perfect. But I mean, if someone's just kind of looking for a job, then that's really not what we want, right? We don't want robots working for us. We want people who are, actually trying to better themselves and are going to be using the company to better themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've summed it up. Pretty well. Yeah. So I'd like to something we talked a little bit about off microphone, and I'd love to bring it on microphone now. So to pre-phrase, there's a professional player who I used to sponsor and help manage, who played in Heroes of New Earth many moons ago. And for those who don't know, it's a very similar game to League of Legends or Dota 2, and it kind of preceded their competitive platforms. People like No Taylor, who just won the international, he came from Heroes of New Earth, and a bunch of other players too. And his advice always to young people was get a degree before you become a professional player, so you've got something to do afterwards. I'd like to understand a little bit about your history as a lawyer, and do you see that now as a great move to be a fallback plan for you? Let's say that, business, you have a successful exit or things don't go quite well. Is that part of the reasoning for having that degree? Is it a pivot? I'd love to explore this a bit.
Sure. Just from the outset, I'm just going to say that there is no fallback plan for me. I mean, I get it that, so personally, I feel like, obviously, if you have some form of professional degree and you come from a profession, generally speaking, if you did want to go back to the previous profession that you came from, it wouldn't be too difficult, in all honesty. But I think for me, when I made that decision to move from law to do this, it was something that, it was a fully committed decision, not just on myself, but also my family, my wife. And so, obviously you do need the support of your direct, the people that are part of your life, in your personal life. First and foremost, don't do anything that your wife is going to say no to, right? I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. But, I think at the start, when I decided to do this, it was one thing where I told myself that, look, my livelihood aside, right? When I'm dragging people to do this with me, right, then it is completely unfair for me to feel like there is a fallback plan and there is a plan to go through or whatever, because, everyone else's livelihoods are kind of dependent on my leadership, right? So first and foremost, ethically, I think that's completely wrong to think that way. And even personally, I feel like I've never ever thought that way, because, to me, I care about this cause and this objective so much that, just to show my commitment as well to the business, I invested a lot of my own capital at the beginning. Pre-seed stage. Yeah. So I know money doesn't say a whole lot, but it was just a gesture to show that, hey, let's get things moving, and this is how I'm going to help, right? And in addition to that, I always kind of do half a year checks with my fellow management guys, just to see where they are and stuff like that. And in general, I think the motivation from start to now has always been, there's no turn back. Because I'm not the only one that comes from a profession, right? Two of my other managers come from a finance banking background. My CTO comes from a really big development company that he left his country for to come to Singapore, and my CMO as well. So I think for us, it's kind of like we're all in that sense, and there's really no turning back.
Yeah, and I guess I hate to draw so many Navy SEAL references because you and I certainly aren't Navy SEALs, but they say, that the people who do the training command there often say that those are the best people to come through that training, and you see similar founders too. It's do or die. It's I don't have any other plans. This is what I'm wholly invested into.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, I think that's the only way you're going to succeed, to be very honest, because there are so many times, right? I mean, the one thing that we really, really try to do, and this sounds very cliche, but I think we really embrace this, is we are true blue hustlers, right? Every single thing that we can hustle on, we are always hustling. And this comes down to like, you know, the location of the office, for example, you know, the where we ship in our furniture from, everything, you know. I mean, at the start, it was just to give you a very silly example, but I think it rings, you know. So we're in Singapore right now, but we're not exactly right in the middle of the city. So we're just off the city fringe, and you know, we're paying a much lower rent than we would if we were in the city. So that to me was the first thing that, you know, when we started out, we were thinking, you know, look, do we spend X amount of having a prestigious address, or do we, you know, channel that money into something else that could be better used, right? So that's the first decision we made. And then we ordered a whole bunch of furniture from online source and it shipped to Singapore. The entire shipment, you know, weighed in at about 2 tons. We assembled everything ourselves amongst the founders, and because, you know, we just wanted to do the things that we could do with our own you know, efforts without having to pay unnecessary amount of fees just to get everything done. And we've kind of taken on that kind of methodology and philosophy all the way through, and I think it's kind of worked out well, because, you know, first, when you're financially prudent, it shows your investor that, hey, these guys are not just out to, you know, pay themselves and kind of use my money to, you know, to play on a house, right? Let's just put it that way. But they're really more serious about, you know, taking the business personally, and they want to see the business grow in a way that I would want to see the business grow. So I think there's a lot of aspects where people don't realize that, you know, hustle matters, not just to you, not just the money that you're saving, but to the people who need to, you know, kind of gain that confidence in the business in the longer run.
Yeah, and it's all about finding out, I guess, as a startup, cost savings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, is it more cost effective for you to pay for someone to assemble that furniture, or for you to go out and you know, assemble it yourself? And quite often it is cheaper and better for you to do it yourself. Same thing if you know how to service a car, especially in a country like Australia where it's quite easy. You know, maybe you should go service a car because it costs you $40 for oil and $18 for a filter.
Yeah.
And then a couple of extra accessories. You've got a $60 service, where the cheapest you can really find around here is like $150 to $180 a lot of the time for a service. Yeah. So you're saving over half. So, but then there's the trade-off. Do you have enough time?
Exactly.
And, you know, likely you do, unless you're the CEO of a big, you know, multinational company. You've probably got 45 minutes on a Sunday to service your car and to save yourself a bit of money, especially when you're a startup founder and you're paying yourself little to nothing to run your company as well, for sure. Yeah. So I wanted to chat a little bit about the Singaporean government as well. So you mentioned you did some work for them. For those people who aren't based out of the region, what's the support like for esports from the government, and what's the narrative that comes out of them, if any?
I think in general, the government in Singapore is really supportive of startups and, you know, any entrepreneurs in Singapore in general, right? For esports, you know, it's obviously caught traction in you know, the past year or so with them. There are plenty of grants that they give out to Singaporean startups to you know, to start businesses in innovative areas, and especially upcoming areas. So for sure, there's a whole bunch of opportunities, you know, if you really needed a government grant to do it. But obviously, it's not like anyone can just get money from the government. You need to have a proper business proposal, etc., and a scalable business, right? It can't just be, you know, a restaurant that you're opening that's going to be esports themed. That's not going to fly, right? It's going to be something that affects the greater economy as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Because I did hear some musings out of Singapore that, you know, I guess for startups and then also esports as a whole, the government is quite supportive. Is it true that esports is recognised as a support by the government?
Yeah, it is. So I think there's the Southeast Asian Games that's coming up, and we're participating in that. So it is recognized as a sport. I think, you know, funny enough, it's not really a top-down effect here, at least locally. I'll say that it's kind of like a bottom-up effect, because there are some prominent esports I'll just calling figures in who are Singaporeans, who have a Singapore background. For example, Razer Ming Liang, who's the CEO there, right? So I think they recently announced that they're going to invest 10 million into the local esports scene in Singapore, and it's things like these and prominent people like these who are essentially who have reaped the rewards from the support that they've received from the government, who are saying right now that, hey, look, to the rest of my countrymen who want to enter into the same scene that we are in, this is my contribution back to you guys, and so that's how it's a pretty healthy kind of relationship and ecosystem that we have. But I mean, obviously, there's always room to improve, right? I mean, we could be collaborating way more amongst the local startups that are based in, who are doing esports, etc. But we'll get there. I mean, step by step.
Yeah, look, if nothing else, it's great to see esports recognised as a sport, right? It helps with tax purposes, it helps with visa purposes for incoming, outgoing talent.
Yeah.
And it also shows how you can reap the benefits of having a headquarters there. The Taiwanese market is booming because that's where the headquarters of Antec and Asus and Acer and the local headquarters, as in APAC or APJ headquarters for companies like Intel, global headquarter for Gigabyte, et cetera, are all in this one location. And that means that while their sales mightn't match other countries, they're able to do with the money more than they can with the other countries, because all of the sales from America that are much more due to a higher population are funneling into Taiwan and such. And that enables companies like Razer, with the Singapore example, to fund so much of their local industry that helped them become something.
Yeah, so I mean, it is definitely. I feel like government support is really important. I think for us as well, we've received quite a bit of support from our own from our own initiatives that we've been running in Singapore. So it really helps, especially when the government understands. There's one thing to say we recognize esports, is another to really understand what does it entail, right? And I think that understanding is absolutely critical, because if they don't understand what you're trying to do in the larger scheme of things, and they're just thinking, oh, you guys are just another version of sports, then you're not going to get very far anyways. So it's really when they take the time to have a consultative process and a kind of like open dialogue with the people that are involved in this new and up and coming growth industry. That's, to me, that's what really I kind of value the most for our government, and the way that they deal with esports startups such as ourselves.
Fantastic. So I'd love to get any suggestions for founders and those listening to the podcast who are looking to create their own startup or raising capital or such at the moment. Number one, I think, is identifying an exit plan. A lot of startup founders I talk to haven't even considered this because they're not looking into the future. However, a lot of investors would like that to, be in the forefront of the mind when you're pitching to them. So how early is too early for you to identify an exit plan, and what kind of questions did you ask yourself about acquisition versus public listing versus is there any other way?
Sure. Well, that's a very big topic. But okay, I mean, I'll just start off by saying
you've got a very big topic. You've got 25 seconds. Let's go.
So basically, it really depends on the investor you're speaking with, right? I mean, for institutional investors, they're going to be thinking more along the lines of a big acquisition in the future, right? So you got to know, like knowing your audience, you need to know your investor, right, to begin with. So that's the first thing. But obviously, you yourself as a founder, you have certain, kind of objectives that you want to accomplish with the business. So you've got to be transparent with that as well, because trust me, if there's one thing, investors can tell when you're just putting on a show for them, or you genuinely, had that plan in mind, So first things first, obviously, stay true to your original plan. And look, if you're pitching it to an investor and you're thinking, I don't want to go down the acquisition route or the IPO route, or I just want to focus on, at least for the first 2 to 3 years on becoming, profitable in the traditional sense, then stick by that gun. That's exactly, that's kind of what that's our direction as well, kind of reflecting our direction. But like I said, if an investor doesn't feel your vibe, or if they don't feel like that's something that they want, then generally speaking, you also don't want to, have that kind of investor on board, because an investor is not just someone that gives you money. They give you direction. They are essentially your mentors and your, kind of like, it's making sure that you're steering in the right direction. And the moment where, you guys pitch something that, you really didn't mean, and then you guys get into a relationship together, what you're going to find out is, the investor will be more of a kind of like a barrier to your business than a help, because and it's not their fault as well, because, you had told them something else, and they're now trying to steer you back onto the original path, right? So it's all about finding that again, alignment, right, with the investor, and making sure that, they know exactly where you want to head to. And look, if they're not on board, they're not on board. Fine. Go look for another one.
And I've talked to a founder very recently about something similar to that too, about being absolutely as open and honest as you can, because the investors need to know, and I think this was in the podcast with Matthew Gunnan, so if you want to listen to that, for the listeners, head to bigesports.gg/51. You can see the episode and show notes there. And he was saying how it's so important to be honest, because the investors want to know that if you have a problem with the business, you're not going to hide it. You're going to come to them, because they're invested just as much as you are. Just because you're working day to day within the business, these investors often have a lot of experience, and they're also putting up real money behind you. So it's in their best interest to see you succeed as well. You're all in the same boat together. Yeah.
Honestly, I couldn't agree with that more. I think, that is the approach that we took. Obviously, we did to show, that you really mean what you're saying as well. I think a large thing that people don't do is, they don't come up with a really, really good and solid business plan. I mean, clearly we did it a bit of an overkill. So our initial business proposal was about 300 pages long, only because, it had a lot of good research that we were doing. Clearly, I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but I'm just saying that, don't go to your investor with like an 8-page or even a 20-pager that doesn't say anything, or rather says a lot without saying anything at all. So you want to, show that direction by showing the research that you've done, showing that, you know your facts and figures, what's going around the industry, your go-to-market plan, your marketing strategy, etc. All these things form that picture for the investor, and it allows them as well to make a better decision on aligning with you, right? Imagine if they didn't really know much, and then they say, okay, yeah, I'm on board, right? I'll be pretty scared then, because I'll be thinking, whoa, do you really know what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, right. And it's about saying the most amount you can in the least amount of words, right? And this is something that I've been trying very hard over the past year. And I see a lot of other startups, now that I don't do it, I see a lot of other startups doing it too. When they're asked a question and they over-explain and they start going on tangents and talk about possibilities, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, someone who I've worked with in the past, with James, with a partner in BDM of ours, is, answer the direct question and that's it. Right. And then maybe if there's some silence, then you can start to input something else. But just try to be direct and answer what's asked of you and nothing more.
Yep. Yeah. I don't really much to say about that, but I think in general, we conduct ourselves pretty transparently. With full transparency to our investor, only because I feel like to begin with, when we did enter into this relationship, it was one where I think a large part of it was he trusted the team first. And then he because he trusted the team, he was willing to kind of listen to what we had to pitch to him. And because of that, I think at the very beginning, we kind of laid underground rules to say, look, if we have good things to tell you, we'll tell it to you. But equally, when we have problems and we need your help, we're definitely going to come to you as well. So let's just be on a common understanding regarding that.
So a topic that's quite a passion point for me, we talked about off microphone, and I gave you a bit of a challenge to say, hey, in the industry, there's a few buzzwords. There's things like blockchain, there's things like esports. People talk about meditation and the possible woo-woo that surrounds that, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted you to explain to the listeners a little bit more about gamification. What are the buzzwords out there that people should look out for and avoid? And where can people go to read some solid information with some backed up statistics, numbers, case studies, reports, studies, what have you, to prove that it is a solid thing, it's here to stay, and it does actually add something appealing to your offering?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there are two aspects to gamification, right? I mean, the first is a qualitative aspect, and then there's the quantitative part, right? I'll talk about the qualitative part first. I think, when people hear the word gamification, the first thing that jumps into their mind is the word game, right? And they're thinking it's all about a game, so games are gamification, but really that's not true. Generally speaking, gamification is defined as, creating an environment with familiar game mechanics and dynamics in a context where there's no game involved, right? So, for example, what we've done is, obviously, when you're spectating an esports match or a sports match, there's no game involved. You're watching something, and it's a consumption of content, but you're not actually playing a game, right? So what we've done there is that, we've gamified the process to make it fun for you to go through certain game mechanics and dynamics while you're watching a game, right? So that's the first things first. And I think in terms of how, so we've done quite a lot of research on this part as well, and how the idea of gamification really came about. To us, it's really about creating an authentic and meaningful experience, right? And the thing is, when you do gamification and when you get people to be involved in that process, what you're really doing for them is you're saying to them, hey, I have this experience for you, and I want you to go through it so that you can form a memory, right? And that's what, I think, to me, what gamification really means. And because that it means that way, right? It also means that when you're doing a silly game like a spin the wheel or some, for the lack of a better example, let's just use spin the wheel, right? It is gamifying some, to a certain extent, but it's really a silly form of gamification, which really doesn't give you any experience. So, the first things first is, if you hear someone saying that they're gamifying something, and then you realize that the degree of gamification is really negligible to none, then you're not using the term right? Because the end goal of gamification is to create, again, that experience and that memory. So that's the qualitative side of things, right? And then the quantitative side of things, obviously, is that you want to see a greater level of activation in terms of people. So I'll take an example where, they conducted a study for gamification in a university. I think it's in Australia, actually. And what they did was that it was for a psychology course. And they wanted to encourage the students to, first and foremost, critique the papers that were being submitted, as well as to kind of, submit their own pieces to a particular domain and as part of a game, right? So it was meant to be a learning kind of educational objective for that particular case study. And what they realized was what they realized was that when they did gamify the process of, for example, when you did submit in a good critique and people were voting on your critique and you ended up on the top of the leaderboard, etc. A lot of students were way more motivated to kind of participate in the in this exercise. And the ultimate kind of like a validation point for the professor was that when they conducted a test on the material that was submitted, right, they realized that the amount of knowledge retention that was in the minds of the students from what the articles they were reading or their own articles that they were submitting was way higher than it would have been, So I think that's a very good example of using, kind of like a fun experience to learn as well as to retain information. So obviously, when you put it in a commercial context, when you are using a fun experience to learn about a brand and to listen to their messaging, then you're going to be retaining it way more, right? And that kind of leads me back to my final point, which is, I think, in this day and age where, clearly everyone is fighting for audience's time, it's not about, no one cares what your message is. Let's just be clear about that. They don't care what your story is. they really want to know, and they want to be given a reason about why they should be listening to you to begin with, right? So that's the problem with a lot of brands and a lot of people out there who have really great stories to tell, about how they could contribute to a vibrant esports, scene, or how they have been contributing, but they haven't really found the right recipe to communicate that to the audience.
Yeah, I think it's a good start for an explanation. Where should people go to do some more research themselves on this topic if they might still be skeptical?
To be honest, we did it the traditional way. So we dug up some academic databases. We've studied, one paper that really left an impression on me was done by two Harvard guys, and they really talked about the experience economy. And I suggest that as a good read. And the thing is, I think, if you don't mind, I like to say this part as well, is that, right now, sports is being consumed in a passive and linear fashion. And it mimics a service, in a content service, in a sense that, you kind of watch TV like a service, right? Your network gives you a service. And what they really need to do is they need to evolve into an experience economy. And the best, kind of case study is someone like Disney, right? So Disneyland, when you go to Disneyland, you're paying a ticket for the experience. They don't even need to hard sell you on the items that they're selling in the stores right there, because when you take a ride and, you look at all these cool, animations and the ride is really cool and everything, as an adult, I still go to the store to buy a Shrek hat. Not that I need the hat, not that I'll ever wear that hat, but hey, look, I like the experience, and I just went there to buy something. And I think a lot of, it's a worthy point, because first people need to be buying into the experience before they will naturally want to kind of give you the consumption as a next step.
Yeah, the experience economy is an interesting word that you said, because I remember reading a book about it when I was at Thermaltake and did a report on it, and it's an interesting book. I mean, if you look at the general reviews, it's got a 5 out of 5 on Amazon.com.au and a 3.8 out of 5 on Goodreads. It was published in '99, and it's talking about describing the experience economy as the next economy following the agrarian economy.
Yeah, exactly.
The industrial economy and the most recent service economy. And it's true, I guess in a wider sense, people are paying a lot these days for experiences, especially younger people. And that's where a lot of the results are saying they're not focused so much on things and the future, but on, doing something that's interesting to them, fun and cool, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's to be expected. I guess it is inherently, profoundly personal when you're talking about memory, right? So, and I think that's where, a lot of sports marketers and esports marketers really need to start tapping into that. Clearly a lot of papers have been written about this, but everyone's just still of the mindset that, they don't know any better sometimes. And they're just going to be like, so look, Chris, I want to get into the esports space. What should I do? And most of the times, the person that's serving them would probably say, oh yeah, you could sponsor a team, you could run an event and stuff like that. And it's all the wrong direction. I feel like, it needs to be one where if you want to stand out from the crowd, which should be your objective, then do something that will stand out from the crowd, right?
Yeah. No, 100%, man. Yeah, 100%. I've talked about that a lot in some recent content across multiple platforms, which is great. Yeah, and thanks for taking the time to introduce that. Look, being mindful of time, can you let us know what's coming up next for you on the soon horizon?
Yeah, so we are actually working on a really interesting campaign right now for a fairly big client for first-person shooter competition that's coming up in October all the way to November. So that's really exciting. Everyone's all hands on board there, and so for sure, when we do launch that campaign, you'll be seeing it, on social media, on our LinkedIn, etc., on our website. And also we have a couple of other campaigns that are currently in the process of being firmed up for later in the year, as well as beginning of next year. So yeah, generally speaking, that's what we have.
Fantastic, mate. And if people want to follow you and your business online, where can they do so?
Yeah, the best place really is obviously our website at TOKIGAMES.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, TOKIGAMES. We post our updates quite regularly there, not just our company updates, but updates about the esports industry, what's happening with various people, etc. And yeah, I mean, obviously, they hop on LinkedIn to be able to see cool podcasts like these ones.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate. Thanks for the plug. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you to listeners for listening into the Big Esports podcast. It's been a great discussion today. We've covered so many different topics, ranging from proving the gamification in the esports market, how you can actually get some great results and remove some of the woo-woo, to advice on creating your own startup, being a founder, and life before and after startups. Thanks for listening once again today. If you'd like to see the show notes, the topics, and any links to what we've talked about today, you can head to bigesports.gg/52. That's the numbers 52, and it'll all be in there. Thanks for listening. Feel free to give us a rating. If it's 5 stars, that'd be even better, on any platform that you listen, iTunes, Spotify, etc. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning into our podcast today. For show notes, relevant links and upcoming projects, you can check us out online at bigesports.gg or follow us on our social medias at bigesports_gg.